Yeah, everyone, every student did read that I asked you guys to like acquiesce to me potentially sharing this beyond the four corners of classes and stuff like that. Um, so I just want to make sure that everyone is cool with that. I may just end up sharing an audio file. I don't know. I just don't know. But I am taking it as you guys are okay with it. If you're not okay with it, I think if you just mute yourself and don't speak, you'll never show up as a as a screen capture. But I don't know because I'm still not a Zoom expert. All right. I mean, I think we've stabilized at 30 for the last couple of minutes, so um, we might as well get started. So I hope everyone is doing well today. I want to especially thank Mia Morissette and Alex Barrett for taking time out of their busy schedules to come talk to us today. Primarily about how they got their jobs and what they do in their jobs, and what some of the differences between their jobs are. Because both of them are venture capitalists, but they're venture capitalists in different stages of the life cycle of a startup. Alex is focused on early stage VC investment, while Mia is focused on late stage VC investment. And so my hope is with today's chat, you guys learn a little bit more about careers in VC, kind of what the job actually looks like, although I'm sure there's no such thing as a standard day in the life of, and that you guys get some tips from both Mia and Alex on a variety of things that are practically relevant to you, like how do you make yourself look attractive as a potential hire in VC, but also maybe some advice around broader things, like what sort of advice they would give to young startup founders, and stuff like that. So hopefully this is something that you find interesting and that maybe complements some of the coursework that I give to all of you. So again, thank you so much to Mia and Alex for joining today. And I think, we might as well start this whole session with a pretty open-ended question, which is that, maybe each of you can talk a little bit about how you guys got into VC and kind of what your careers and goals looked like prior to entry into VC. And yeah, so maybe, give us a little bit of that, background. Maybe we can start with Mia and then we'll go with Alex, if that's okay.
Sure. So yeah, the quick background on me. So I'm also a McGill alumni, so graduated 2013, and I wish we had classes like Jiro has, because I had nothing, like I had no clue what VC was at the time when I graduated. But what I really liked is I was super curious. I wanted to learn more about different industries, different types of like operational issues. So that's why I decided to go into consulting. So I did 3-4 years of consulting, and I realized that I was a much better buy-side and strategic thinker than a kind of sell-side person. So decided to make the switch to the investment space and joined a private equity fund called PSP in Montreal, where I learned the whole kind of, how to source a deal to really close a deal. So I learned the whole, investment acumen, I would say. The one thing though I was kind of missing is in consulting, even though you start super young, you still have access to management teams. And when I joined PSP in private equity, this kind of proximity with founders, management teams, you don't have that as much. The PSP is as very, very strong investor, but more on the more passive investor, I would say. So that's why I actually really enjoy my job at PSP, and it's a great firm. But at the time, this was in 2018, Inovia was launching a growth fund, and one of my friends joined the firm, and I was like, whoa, what he was working at for CDPQ, another kind of Canadian pension fund. And it was like, wow, what is this switch from like CDPQ to Inovia? Like, what is this move? What is this new fund? So, I had breakfast with him, and I was actually fascinated by this mandate of the growth story. Inovia is I think the second growth fund in Canada. So the idea of growth, and I'll explain a bit what it is, was very new at the time, and I found it very interesting, which because it was a bit of a mix of private equity, the way we run due diligence, but then when the deal is closed, the way we work with management team is a lot closer to consulting. So for me, growth equity was like the perfect fit between consulting and private equity. So that's why I decided to to do the jump to switch to Inovia Growth in 2018. So yeah, it's been about 2 years, pretty much as of today, and really enjoying the switch I've made. So during the discussion, we'll explain a bit more venture versus growth, but that's a quick story on me.
Perfect. Alex?
Yeah, sure. So I was also a McGill grad. I think I was in Jiro's first year of teaching the VC class, which was in 2014, I believe. And so Mia, we got the class, I guess, 1 year after you graduated.
You got the minimum viable product.
Yeah. So I've been at Inovia since early 2017, which is, I guess, about 3.5 years now. The reason I bring that up is because I think Jiro just said before that he didn't know anything back then when he was teaching the class. Most of the time in my job, I still feel like I don't know anything. And so I'm happy to take the next 90 minutes here and share my views on a lot of my experience over the last 3.5 years, but I want to make sure that it comes from a place of still being very junior and learning a lot in this role. So I'll share my experience, but don't take anything I say as a rule. I did not plan on going into venture capital. It was one of many courses I took at McGill. It was one of many things I was thinking about coming out of McGill. I went and did a master's at the London School of Economics to go a bit deeper on finance and also meet students from across the world and with different perspectives. And I came back from that and I went into consulting. I think for me, I didn't mind the consulting job. What I didn't like was working in a very large firm. I worked both at Deloitte and at Accenture, and those are both firms of 300,000 or 400,000 employees. And so it feels like no matter how you perform, you might have kind of individual recognition, but you're never having an impact on the firm as a whole because the firm is just so big. And that personally for me was not motivating. I felt like I wanted to have an impact on building something. And so I started looking into the world of startups and the world of technology. At this stage, I was a pure finance and an accounting individual. I had done my CPA and my CFA. I had zero experience in the technology world, but I started thinking about what it might look like to start a company and start building a firm, not because I had some phenomenal idea, but because I wanted to have a larger impact in the work that I was doing. Through that kind of discovery process of trying to start a company, I think I very smartly realized that I had no idea what I was doing in terms of starting a company. I was running into walls left, right, and center. I was struggling to kind of convince people to jump on board and raise capital. And what that led to was actually building some relationships in the venture community and realizing that actually the best way to achieve the goals I was trying to achieve was as part of a venture capital firm where it's a small company. I get to have a large impact on not only the firm that I'm building, which is Inovia, but also the companies that are in our portfolio. And so when I was reflecting on these goals of mine, that actually seemed like a good fit, but it actually happened completely accidentally and was not a career path that I was striving for coming out of school. So that's a little bit of the story of how I wound up at Inovia. I do early stage investing here for the last 3.5 years and have the pleasure of working alongside Mia here in Montreal. Mia says her story very humbly, but we were begging to have Mia on the team. My story was I had to hustle for like 3 months through interviews, but Mia is a great asset and it's a pleasure to work with her.
One thing that I'll highlight that was common with both what Mia and Alex said is they both emphasized that they wanted to have direct involvement in companies, right? So that is something that's a little bit common to both the early stage and the late stage. But the other thing that I'd like you guys to reflect on is, I feel like there's a very honest introspection in how both Alex and Mia kind of described how they ended up in VC. They were really kind of thinking about who they are and breaking it down into fundamentals to really try to figure out, well, is VC a good fit for me? And to the extent that VC is a good fit for me, you know, what's a better fit, early stage or late stage, right? So it's one of the things that's always impressed me with both of them is just the way they break down a decision-making problem, which I think is really wonderful, and it's something that we don't really have an opportunity to teach in the classroom. So, so I love the answers you gave, actually. And in some sense, in giving the answer, you guys have both maybe actually done a good job advertising VC as a potentially exciting career path. I would be interested in your views on, you know, the extent to which you feel A, that statement is correct, and B, how the hiring environment has changed since you guys entered the field. Yeah, so I don't know who wants to take this or if you both want to chime in, but I'd be curious of your thoughts on that.
Sure, I can. So on the on the excitement, is VC or growth, is it a good fit for me? I think Jiro, like you said, this feeling of building Canadian global tech champions, that's something that I found so exciting. And the landscape for growth has changed so much in Canada over the past over the past 2 years. There's been more growth deals than over the past decade in Canada. So the environment is changing, like the mentality of entrepreneurs is changing, and that's like super exciting to be part of it. When my first 6 months at Inovia, when I was at the Lightspeed IPO party, like that was like a super exciting moment to kind of be part of this this great Canadian success. So for me, the excitement of the growth there is definitely there. I think I found my sweet spot. How did the hiring environment change? I think it has changed, and Alex, I'll be very curious if your first perspective. It was like a few years back before me, but first, I think there's a lot more involvement from schools to learn earlier on what is venture capital. So I think that's great to have this kind of like education, and people are more aware of it. And the good thing is there's more opportunities. I think there's more funds because some more private equity funds are kind of like diversifying into more growth VC funds, and the other way around, there's also more venture capital funds, and so I feel there's more education. So yes, that means a bit more demand, but there are also more funds and more opportunities to grow, and more types of when venture capital started, it was mostly kind of seeds there, and then like the later stage funds are slowly emerging. So I do feel there's more opportunities, and we'll talk probably a lot more about the recruiting process, but it's a space where to get in, being into the ecosystem, not only talking to firms, but also to the various kind of incubators, the various companies, it's like super important. And I think this is like, and Montreal has so much to offer in terms of like tech events, tech ecosystems, that you guys are in a very lucky position, and especially at McGill, like McGill is really well positioned for this, to kind of be into this ecosystem, to kind of build the right relationships to decide if that's a path that you really want to pursue.
Yeah, I agree, Mia. I think the hiring landscape has changed quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 years. When I joined Inovia, I think we were 12 people, and now we're 35 or something like that. So it's tripled in size over the last few years, which means that every single year there's going to be 4 or 5 or 6 opportunities to get in, and then that's just Inovia. Then there's also a whole bunch of other new venture capital firms in Canada. There's corporate VCs, there's institutional VCs, and so there's more capital in the market than ever. There's more funds, and that means that there's more opportunity to get in.
So by the way, so kind of talking about this, I mean, at a practical level, one of the things that I try to tell students when they ask me, how can I get a job in VC, is I suggest that they do a few different things outside of the course or outside of their first job. So maybe we can do the following, like kind of a little bit quickly, which is I'll mention 5 different things that I usually recommend students, and you can say whether you think it's very important, useful, or not so important. Because I think that might be useful for students to know, and I'm going to learn if I should change my advice to people. So I'm just gonna, I'll say one thing. You guys can just answer your view on it, and then we'll move. I'll say the second thing, and we'll do that until we, I guess, go through the five.
Jiro, can I preface this with like one statement, which is
Sure.
There's no path to being a venture capitalist. And the reason I'm saying that is because on an investment team, you're going to have a whole bunch of different perspectives and backgrounds. No investment team wants to have 15 bankers or 15 consultants or 15 engineers. You're going to have a few of each of those. And so what that means is that every background is capable of getting into VC, whether you're an arts background, a science background, an engineer, a business person, an entrepreneur, or none of the above. There's still an opportunity. So I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that, because some people feel like there's a traditional path that you need to follow, and I really don't think that's the case.
Perfect. You actually knocked out the fifth one. So I'll let Mia just say whether she agrees or disagrees. And then we'll go to the first four that I was going to mention. But
We agree on what Todd said, so I'm good on this one.
Perfect. So the first one that was on my list was networking, right? So you're in your first job, you know, and like how much should you think about how important is it for you to network with the local ecosystem, you know, and is it different in terms of networking with VCs versus networking with just the broader community? How important is networking to potentially have an opportunity to get hired?
I would put high, but I would add smart networking.
Smart.
You need to do it in a smart way, because I mean, you know, like when I receive these inbound emails from, you know, students or people who want to go into McGill, into VC, I think, you know, having a clear purpose of what you're trying to learn more, what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to learn is, so yeah, I would just add the smart networking.
I love that. Alex?
Yeah, I think the evidence is that, you know, our past 5 job postings have not been posted externally.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's evidence enough that networking is absolutely key, because the people that were networked with somebody at our firm were those that got invited to the process.
Yeah. By the way, like, you know, one thing I'll also point out is if we think back at both Mia and Alex's first answer to, like, their answers to my first question, which was just how and why did you end up in VC? I think you can see that they're probably very smart networkers, right? Because there's clarity of purpose, right? That's where, you know, thinking about things from first principles, from fundamentals, really helps zone you in to what sort of networking you should be doing. Because you're right, networking can be done in a terrible way where you're just, you know, you're getting a bunch of, you know, what I would call like weak contacts, because there's no real connection there. And it's not obvious to the other person why you connected with them. So I think actually that's fabulous. I'm actually going to blatantly steal your characterization of it going forward. So here's another one. Reading and learning. So basically after school, after you're done with school, you know, paying attention to whatever you can to learn more about VC, about startups. So think like tracking blogs of prominent practitioners, you know, maybe digesting some YouTube, you know, some well-curated YouTube content, maybe some Twitter stuff, where you get a pulse on what's happening in the ecosystem in a relatively low-cost way. Is this something that you view as important or not so much?
I would say it's pretty important, but the thing is, I would like being curious. I think it's like probably like one of the number, you know, 1 or 2 assets of going into VC, I would say, and like it shouldn't be a homework. You know, you shouldn't put like into your to do like, oh, I need to read this blog. Like it should be something that you naturally do. If you don't, you know, maybe there's something to think about that VC might not do. So that's the way I would spin it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If this is painful to you, maybe this isn't the right job. I'm guessing, Alex, you completely agree with that statement.
I completely agree. Yeah, and you need to be thinking about something before you're doing it. Like, I know there's like a common saying, which is like, before you get promoted into a position, you already need to be doing that position, right? Before you're going to get hired as an analyst or an associate at a VC fund, you need to demonstrate that you're already kind of thinking about that world and have, unique viewpoints. And so I completely agree with Mia's statement. If that's not something that's already coming to you, then you should reflect on whether you're going to enjoy the job at all.
Very cool. So here's another one, which is formalizing your own thoughts, right? So taking maybe what you read and what you learn and actually doing something to really crystallize your own thinking on things. This could be something like, for instance, starting a blog, right? I remember having breakfast with your boss at some point, Chris Arsenault. And that was actually one of the things that he highlighted to me was that he actually found that starting a blog with Inovia was really helpful for him to give him the opportunity to really carefully think about the things he believes in, right? The ways that he thinks the world is going to evolve. And he went out of his way to say that, like, for him, that was really helpful. What's your thoughts about starting to do a miniature version of that even before you would ever become a VC?
Alex, start on this one.
I definitely don't think it hurts. I don't know that you need to come into a VC firm with a following and having kind of a demonstrated ability to gather followers and share insights with the world. But this is something that we will test for in the interview process. So I think like having the ability to do it is important. Actually going and doing it and building a blog community and stuff is probably less relevant.
Yeah, I think I would have never gotten the job if it was about writing a blog. This is like my number one of like worst nightmare. Alex was my job when it comes to this. But I do think like, having your thoughts in a structured, concise way, like for me, it's more the ability of absorb tons of data and making your opinion in a concise way. That I think that's super valuable in the job. Like we have so many data points everywhere and you need to make a decision in a short time frame with tons of data, or sometimes the opposite, with actually no data and you still have to have like a rational opinion. So I think that's an important ability to get.
And the difference in answer there between me and Mia can kind of be our first drawn parallel of early versus growth stage investing. At the early stage, it's probably more relevant because you need to take more bets on the future of the world with limited data points, which means actually thinking about how that market's going to develop before it's already developed. Whereas in Mia's case, typically a lot of those data points are already there, or more of them are there. And so it requires less predicting of world-changing events and more analysis of performance.
Yeah, that's actually that's pretty interesting, right? Because in some sense, anecdotally, if you look at the world of content production by VCs, the blogs that VCs put out are almost entirely early stage blogs, which is consistent with the statement that you're making, Alex, right? I mean, I would also say, I would think, maybe this is wrong, but I would think also the value of a blog in helping with deal sourcing is higher in the early stage than in the late stage, maybe. Or just more generally, right? The ability to hustle your way. Maybe, actually, this goes to my fourth and now final bullet point, which was showing an ability to hustle, right? To do something a little bit unusual to capture insights or to network with potential entrepreneurs. Is this something that you guys look for in the interview process? That kind of thing that something that where you would not expect everyone to do that, right? But it seems actually meaningful in whatever case or exercise you give them. How important is that in terms of a personality characteristic?
Okay, I'll start. I think it is pretty important, but then again, this is again something that you cannot really train for it. this is something that, we'll kind of see pretty quickly, that kind of drive. So it's about a hustle, it's about drive, and also it's about, I would add, VC, it's you work in an unstructured environment. So having this kind of like adaptability to work in this kind of like, not in a big corporation, but being flexible, like this is, I would all put that in that kind of like same bucket of hustling, drive, and really being adaptable and flexible, and that's something that's a bit tough to test in interviews. So, but we like it does highlight.
The way I typically judge a first interview that I do with a junior level candidate at Inovia is in three buckets. One of them is IQ, which is obviously about intellect. One of them is EQ, which is about emotional kind of culture fit, values fit, all that kind of stuff. And the third one is what we kind of call internally as HQ, which is hustle quotient. And I kind of rate the candidates across those three things. And if any of those three is extremely weak, they probably don't move through to the next round. And so I consider it as one of the main pillars of being an early stage investor and being successful. I think a lot of the job at the early stage especially is getting in front of entrepreneurs that may not have a website live yet, may not have a product. These people, how do you find them? How do you think of creative ways to source deals? How do you get in the room with entrepreneurs that don't necessarily that aren't raising capital or that just raise capital? And so this is a lot of the job. And funny enough, in our interviews, we usually give a case study. And often that case study is on an Inovia portfolio company. And we don't tell candidates a lot of instructions on what to do. And we actually had candidates in the past that were calling the companies that we had in the case studies and trying to get the CEO and management teams on the phone and stuff. And we've actually had to explicitly write now in the case study, do not contact the management team, because we have people doing that and kind of fact checking what the case data that we're giving them. So yeah, I think it's a big part of the interview process, and I think it's a big part of the job, especially on the early stage.
Awesome. I mean, I think you guys have given a lot of actually very useful guidance on, I mean, I would even say it's not just getting into VC, it's actually assessing for yourself whether you might be a good fit for VC, which arguably is even more important. Because you're right, you don't want, like, if you have to force yourself to do stuff to get into VC, it's probably not a good sign. So I would definitely, tell every student to like really think about, right, what was mentioned as core characteristics of a person that makes them maybe a right fit for either early stage or late stage. There's some stuff that's common, there's some stuff that's different. You really want to reflect like that. Maybe we can move on now to a different kind of subtopic, which is, I think students also like to know about what is this job, right? And maybe we can call it like a day in the life of a VC. Maybe both of you can comment a little bit on that, if there is such a thing, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you just said, there is not such a thing. So that's the first answer. But when people ask me this question, I kind of like put it in three buckets. I put it in the sourcing, the due diligence, and the value creation. That's a bit how I kind of put my day in buckets. And like the percentage of which I put in each bucket is obviously like different by period. But I think like, so sourcing, it's all about this kind of like building of network and connections, and like kind of putting together like patterns or which companies out there could be potential fit for Inovia. So that's probably like a 20-30% of my time. Then the due diligence is when we have when we have that step of the funnel of deals, like for the few ones that we're super interested. For growth deals, this is usually like a 4 or 5 weeks of process of intense due diligence to really, because like one of the let's say really important for growth deals, the risk is a bit less so about kind of product market fit and market risk, like which Alex is focusing more on. Oftentimes the risk for growth deals is more around the scalability of the unit economics, the execution, the kind of like global play. So this is why going deep into the matrix is super important. So I do spend quite a bit of time on that. And then the bucket that personally I enjoy the most, and that goes a bit to the, early discussions, is this value creation bucket. Once the deal is done, how can Inovia support this company to become a Canadian champion? And there are several ways to do this, either be it like on the talent front, on the M&A front, on the finance front, and this is a part of my job that I enjoy quite a bit. So, I kind of really put it in buckets, and it changes all the time, but that's roughly how it is for me.
So actually, Alex, maybe something that might be interesting, if you agree with the buckets, maybe even talking a little bit about how the proportion of the bucket is different for early stage than late stage. I mean, Mia kind of hinted to that a little bit already, but but answer this the way you want, to be honest.
I think I agree with her about those three things. I would say that on the early stage, the due diligence piece is probably slightly lighter. And so it's probably a little bit heavier on the sourcing, and a little bit lighter on the due diligence, if there was a difference. I would also add maybe a fourth bucket, which sometimes we don't necessarily consider part of our job. We consider it extracurricular, but that's everything related to firm building. I mean, we're a small company. Every team member participates in the future of Inovia, and that comes to how we make decisions internally, how we're portrayed in the community, what events we take part in, what the future of our teams look like in hiring. And so we all participate in those initiatives, which is another main driver of my enjoyment in the role too. Back to what I was saying at the start about feeling like I'm building something and feeling like I'm having an impact on my workplace. I appreciate being able to partake in those initiatives as well as the portfolio support and due diligence deal flow activities.
Yeah, actually, I love that you mentioned this, because this is one of the things that has impressed me the most about Inovia and its culture as a whole, is that I feel like you guys are pretty smart at doing this, right? Because what you're saying is, with this fourth bucket, right? How do you build Inovia into, the best brand in Canada and a global brand? And you see a lot of venture firms where they'll basically dip their toes in everything, right? They're going to be like, let's do a bunch of social events, let's do this, let's do that, let's do that. And then it makes them lose focus, right? And I feel like Inovia has always been good at editing what to do versus what not to do. And so that means, right, we were using the word smart before, like smart involvement and smart actions, not trying to do everything. I always felt that there was this really kind of rationalizable parsimony to how, even like when Chris talks about, and like another way to think about it is, I've reached out and, you guys have always been amazing at helping me with stuff in the course, but there are times where, you're like, well, not really. And it kind of makes sense because you can't do everything. And so I actually think that I had never thought about this before, but the fact that you mentioned this to me made me realize, like, actually there is a bit of a difference with Inovia compared to other places in a way that I think has really helped you guys build and leverage your strengths, which is pretty awesome. Maybe like one fun tidbit is, maybe, there's no such thing as a typical day, but maybe you guys remember one awesome day. Maybe you could tell us something about what was an awesome day that made you like, oh man, I am so happy I have this job.
I think for me it was actually the worst and exciting day at the same time. So I flew to Toronto. We were supposed to close a deal. So I go to the office. I'm super excited, to be there for that closing party of the deal. And then I receive a call day of the closing, and closing is after like 3-4 months of intense due diligence. Everything is settled, and basically I received a call that, we're not doing this deal anymore. And so just flew and I was astonished by the whole situation of why we didn't do the deal. And I was it was my first deal at Inovia. I was so excited about it, and I was a bit bummed. And then I received a text from Chris. Okay, Mia, I know your day sucks right now, but come back to Montreal ASAP, take the next plane, and you have a Lightspeed IPO party like as soon as you settle on the plane. So it kind of, from the worst day to the, super happy day. So I kind of flew back ASAP as I could, and it was a super exciting moment for the firm to kind of have our first IPO ever. So yeah, that was like a super exciting day for me at Innovia.
The Lightspeed IPO party was a lot of fun. I think obviously winning deals is are great days. You put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into building relationships with entrepreneurs, and when you find out that they've selected you as a partner to work with for the next decade, it's obviously a great feeling. I can't pinpoint necessarily one day in particular. I mean, what we always talk about with entrepreneurs is that these relationships are real roller coasters. Like companies have a lot of up and downs, markets have a lot of up and downs, and these are early stage companies that are going to go through lots of trials and tribulations. And so I take the mindset of trying not to get too high on good days and too low on bad days, and kind of be that steady hand for the entrepreneur when they need it, because they're obviously going through a lot more emotion and hardship than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from other VCs as well, where they've highlighted that that's an important part of the job, to just help soothe or calm, I think, the founder who's really having, as you said, much wild, any twist and turn you feel, they're feeling 10x, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting that you know that. Now I'll also say that you guys both emphasized Inovia's IPO, sorry, not Lightspeed point of sales IPO. And I'd say like that was an exciting and amazing day for Inovia, but it was also a wonderful day for the Montreal tech community, right? So that was a big deal for anyone who cares about our city. So I would almost say that was an exciting day for me, even though I'm just completely at the periphery as well. Maybe we can then move from day in the life and maybe go to something we've already talked a bit about, which is early stage versus late stage investment. So I'll let you guys talk about it. Maybe also starting from the basics, because there are some students here who are not my VC students. They're applied corporate finance or in some other programs. So they may not be overly familiar about things like the life cycle of startups and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll let you guys take the baton from there.
Alex, you want to go first with early stage?
Sure. So Inovia has been doing early stage investing since 2007. We've raised 4 early stage funds over that period of time. I'll let Mia talk about growth, but growth is somewhat new for us. We raised our first growth fund in 2018. So we're evolving into a full stack firm. What the early stage means essentially is check sizes or round sizes that are from all the way from startup with 2 people building a company in stealth mode or out of a garage, all the way up to about Series B investments. And so you'd be looking at check sizes out of our fund from $500,000 up to about $10 million in round sizes that are kind of between $1 million and $20 million. And so, you would expect that these companies are early in revenue, they're early in product market fit, they're early in kind of global domination. Often they're still local businesses, often the teams are still less than 50 employees, and they're still kind of figuring things out strategically. And some of the reasons that I really like early stage is that I get to participate in some of those initiatives, like building an executive team, like thinking about how to do geographical expansion, like thinking about changes and strategy and brainstorming on what the future of the business and the industry looks like. It's still kind of early enough that a lot of these businesses pivot from the time we invest to the time they grow, and they find new avenues for growth, new channels, new markets. And those are all really exciting discussions that we have at the early stage. And we monitor data closely to pick those different paths that we go down. And so it's really kind of getting in at the foundational level of the company, being one of the first partners for the entrepreneur that they choose in their growth story, and setting them up for success later on when it's more about scale.
So the story on growth. So like Alex said, so growth. This is a new initiative that kind of launched in Inovia 2018, where the check size are between 20 to 30 million from Inovia. We participate in rounds from like Series C, but really to pre-IPO. So it's pretty wide the range of opportunities we look at. Usually at that stage, companies they have an established team. They do have product market fit. We do know that there's a market, a real market demand pull for the type of offering, and the growth story. It's like the risk level is more around the scalability of the platform. Does the unit economics, is this scalable to become like an IPO-able platform? Do they have the right ingredients to really kind of grow internationally into Europe or US or wherever they fit? Is there an M&A roadmap that could happen there? Oftentimes, like as you start growing, there might be opportunities for your company to acquire smaller players, to either go into new geographies, expand your platform, acquire customers. And one thing that we also try to support the best the companies is to get them ready to that next phase of growth, be it an IPO, be it thinking about M&A, like I said. So yeah, the level of risk is really about scalability of the platform. The execution is a risk. This is also where that's also why we have trading partners that are pretty hands-on in the opportunities that they work on. And in terms of growth has a wide definition, I would say. For us, the types of metrics that we're looking for, it's really fast growth, like top line 50% year-over-year growth, and the company doesn't need to be profitable yet. And that's a difference versus other growth PE funds that are out there. But we need to kind of see the path to break even within the kind of next 2-3 years, and yet to help them be in a state where they don't need to IPO, but be in a state where they are IPO ready if this is the path that they decide to be.
Very, very cool. One thing that I'd be curious, because I'm trying to think about like what are some of the other important differences between late stage and early stage investment by VCs. I sometimes find it useful to think about frameworks when you're trying to kind of decide like what questions should you ask yourself when you're trying to size up an opportunity. And at least in my VC class, I introduced 2 frameworks. One framework that's about assessing a project, another that's about assessing people, like the founding team, for instance. One question is, because these aren't checklists, you're not looking for something to look good on every single possible dimension. That's probably not going to be a contrarian bet if you do that. And so you really have this kind of question of how do you weigh the different frameworks? What's more important? And one major question in startups that gets debated all the time is the horse versus the jockey, right? Where do you put more weight on the characteristics of the project, or do you put more weight on the characteristics of the people? And I'd be curious as to whether you feel that weight systematically differs between early stage and late stage.
I don't think it does at Inovia. I think that the way we see these relationships is really as a partner to the entrepreneur. And when we do an investment, we want to spend a lot of time with that entrepreneur, helping them and supporting them along the road. We're also long-term investors. Like, we have an investment horizon of 7 to 10 years, and so that's a significant amount of time with these individuals. And so I would say that Inovia as a firm is very much about chemistry with founders and management teams, values that they have, how they're thinking about building their companies. And I think that if we're willing to walk away from a good deal if we feel misalignment on any of those items in either fund.
Yeah. That's true. All the investment in growth, even though, we're later stage deals, and the people aspect is still very important. Like, all the deals were either deals that venture team has looked at, but could, for some reason didn't work out at the time, or that, they had also built the relationship and kind of passed over to the growth team. So the long-term establishment of this relationship with management team is pretty important.
That's interesting, because one of the things that I've heard from other folks actually is that maybe there's it's all relative. It's not 0-1, but that with early stage, you focus a little bit more on the people, because the people are important for iteration and pivoting if you don't have exactly the right idea from the get-go. Whereas, once you get to the growth stage, like, the company's not going to dramatically change. So you better make sure that the details of the company are looking good at that stage, right? So for instance, the unit economics, as you were emphasizing, Mia. So that's interesting.
Because I think the difference is at the growth stage, the people have some credibility behind them because they've gotten the business to that scale, right? So it helps you diligence the individual when you look at what they've accomplished with the business. At the early stage, you don't have a track record in that business to look at because the business is so early. So you're forced to go back and look at prior track record and previous things that they've done. So I would say maybe it takes a little bit more work to diligence the individuals at the early stage because the business is so early, but it doesn't mean that it's any more important.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. That's definitely interesting. I have a question now, like a little bit more focused actually specifically on Mia, although I'm sure you have views on this as well, Alex, which is, the state of late stage funding in Canada. How has it been historically? How is it now? And what does the trajectory look like? Because there's been a lot more change. As you said, Inovia relatively recently launched their growth fund. And you said they were the second one in Canada. That suggests that this market wasn't that developed 5 years, 10 years ago. So I'd be curious for your thoughts on that and what you think it says about the potential of the Canadian startup ecosystem in general.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And yeah, like when I said that comment, basically there was Georgian, which is another venture fund in Toronto that had a growth fund. But the thing is, they invest mostly in the US. So that kind of, and there's CDPQ that were launching their VC team, but it was still early days, I would say, back in the days. And yeah, now I think what happened. Well, I think first, like Canadian companies are realizing that there's a lot of talent here that they can leverage to really build up great companies from Canada. They don't need to be acquired by U.S. corporations and kind of lose that headquarter. I think there's this shift in mentality. Then I think there's also this large institution with lots of capital. They want to find a way to diversify themselves, and that's why like several of them have launched kind of growth. Investment vehicles like CDPQ right now. We started. This is one of our great partners, and they do a lot more. Not only co-investment, they do a lot more direct deals these days too. Investissement Québec and like FTP and others. They're all kind of really playing a deeper role in the ecosystem. Alex mentioned corporate VCs as well, and for them the level of risk is usually a bit more towards growth than early stage. So yeah, I do think there's like a very interesting shift in the environment. There's also an interesting shift in the sense that there's also more U.S. firms coming to Canada because they realize the potential that Canadian companies have. So we also see more competition coming up from growth fund, and also like PE firms. Like typical PE firms were kind of disregarding the growth and VC environment. And now we're actually starting to compete and sometimes do deals from like large GPs who who are going into the growth environment. So yeah, the environment. I mean, it's definitely good for the companies. A lot more competition for us, but it's pretty exciting to see what's happening.
Yeah, you want to add something, Alex?
No, me as the expert.
Actually, so one thing that I'm kind of curious about, like, do you feel there's been also fundamentally a shift in the mindset of Canadian startup founders, and how important do you think something like Shopify was in triggering that shift in mindset? Because I'm, one of the things that I'm curious about is why has this change been happening relatively recently? What triggered that shift?
I think Shopify definitely helped, and just the kind of Shopify alumni, I would say that they're all starting this ecosystem. That that's kind of like this mentality of we can construct something big in Canada is definitely there. The fact that there's more capital, that like brings a lot of support to entrepreneurs who don't feel the pressure of either needing to sell their companies too early on when they know they can continue. So that kind of capital support, I think that's pretty important. The fact that we're able to attract so much talent in Canada, and not only about, we're talking often about, tech engineers and all that, but there's like now with the remote, the working from home environment, this is super exciting to build not only tech teams, but more than that, from Canada. And there's a lot of talent. We're seeing more and more in our companies, like executives with Canadian roots, looking forward to come back to Canada and build companies. So this is a movement that has been happening that is very exciting for us to build our companies. So yeah, I do believe there's a shift in mentality that you don't need to be backed by a big US VC to build a global champion. Like Canada has the right ground also to do it. Alex,
Cool.
what you add?
Cool. I'm just going to ask one more kind of slightly open-ended question, and then I'll let the audience start asking questions as well. Just one big picture, current opportunities. What excites you about the future right now? And in some sense, I'm more interested in terms of an answer on what your thought process for getting to that view is than maybe the view itself, because I suspect that would be something fairly timeless that people can take away in terms of how you do that, right? How do you forecast future opportunities? I mean, especially, I guess, in the early stage, right? This is kind of like the important thing. So I'd be kind of curious if there's anything you guys want to chime in about on that dimension.
Yeah, in terms of like methodology, like I'm definitely not smart enough to be thinking about future versions of the world on my own. And so what I spend a lot of time doing is talking to individuals, experts, companies. We often have entrepreneur in residences that join us as well, that spend almost all of their time just thinking about what's going to happen and leveraging their network. So it's a process. It's a real learning type of job that you need to just be open to a bunch of information and be able to structure it. Maybe one industry that I'm super excited about right now is digital banking in Canada. I'm actually doing a panel discussion tomorrow on it. If anybody wants to join, you can find the link on my LinkedIn. But I'm hosting the VP of Trading at Wealthsimple, the former CEO of Tangerine, who sold Tangerine to Scotiabank, and the CEO of a company called Neo Financial, to talk about why did digital banking and day trading explode during COVID. And I think, I've seen the data from a bunch of banks, and it seems like this year, all of a sudden, we've seen this shift towards digital banking adoption. Now, we've been hearing about fintech for 10 years. We've been hearing about, all the problems with traditional financial institutions for 5 years, but there was never kind of a market tailwind that actually pushed consumers to adopt these new digital banks. And that seems to have occurred now. And so what opportunities is that going to create? What new businesses are going to be built on top of new trading platforms like Wealthsimple or like some of these other businesses? I'm going to try to figure out tomorrow through talking to Peter at Tangerine, like how is this environment different than a decade ago when he was building Canada's first ever digital bank and sold it in 2012, which was a completely different environment than today. So those are some of the ways that I try to investigate these themes and these trends. You start off with some ideas and an industry of interest, and then you follow it up by exploring and developing hypotheses alongside industry experts and operators that are living and breathing this 24/7. I often say that my favorite part of the job is speaking and interacting with entrepreneurs. And the reason being is that they spend all of their time thinking about their specific problem in their specific industry. I don't spend nearly as much time as they do. I'm jumping from industry to industry across our portfolio of companies and deal flow. And so by default, what that means is that in every conversation, I'm usually the stupidest person in the room because I'm learning on the fly, whereas they're talking about their expertise. And so that means I'm always in learning mode. Every single conversation I have, I'm in learning mode. And so that's how you grow your hypotheses. That's how you grow your point of view as an investor and as a firm. And it's just about kind of systematizing all those data points and figuring out what you're going to do with them and how you're going to invest against them.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat summary, Alex.
Yeah, so, okay. Well, I mean, I think we might as well start opening questions to the audience. So if anyone wants to ask questions, I'm not sure if you can push a raise hand button or a yes button. Okay, raise hand button, I saw that. So one person sent me a question before, which is Mark. So maybe Mark, you can start with the question, and then I'll just start kind of semi-randomly cycling through folks. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Jiro. So I had a question maybe more for Alex regarding the sources, especially at the early stages. Does the sourcing usually occur internally where you guys reach out to startups that you believe could be interesting and would like to invest in them? Or is it the opposite where the startups come to you and they ask for your help, whether it's financially or operationally?
Yeah, great question. There's three main ways of sourcing a deal. There's inbound, which is somebody reaches out to me for advice or to pitch an investment. There's outbound, which is I'm reaching out to somebody because I have an interest in their business or their idea. And then there's referrals, which is I get a referral from a co-investor, from a colleague, from another entrepreneur. I would say the most common way that we source our deals is through referrals. And so that is back to what Mia was talking about in terms of smart networking, in terms of being present in the community, in terms of having your entrepreneurs actually appreciate working with you so they refer you to the next generation of entrepreneurs. And so the best way that actually scales is to have other people refer the best deals to you because they've already done one filter of the deal before you've had to look at it. So it's a great way for us to look at deals. I would say that the second most effective way is outbound. We were just talking about thesis building and views of the world. If I'm making an outbound request to talk to a company, it's probably because I already have a point of view on that industry. I might already have gained knowledge into it. Inbounds are a little bit tougher because somebody's reaching out with a fundraising ask. We don't necessarily have a relationship. They don't necessarily have a mutual point of contact. And it's a little bit tougher because we like to know an entrepreneur or have, mutual points of connection for at least 6 months before we make an investment in somebody. I think I was talking before about how long these relationships are. So I think inbounds can work, but I think people have to be aware that it's probably you should inbound somebody for relationship building or for networking quite far in advance of actually looking for funding to make sure that you're targeting the right message and the right relationship.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Esteban?
Yeah, so my question is more with regards of valuation. So of course we learned these different methods in school, and we know that this can work for like big enterprises because you have all the data, you have all the annual reports, but like for startups, like in general, I also heard it already, like in general, venture capitals, they use kind of different valuation methods. And so I wanted to ask you, like, more or less, like is the same valuation method you use for early stage than for late stage? And also, like, how much weight is like the type of entrepreneur, like how much weight does the people are in the valuation, for instance, like when you invest in a really early stage company? I don't know if you get it.
You want to go, Mia?
Sure. So I'll take so on valuation, I think at the later stage, I mean, we will run the typical analysis, on kind of public comps and like percentage transactions, all of the stuff that you learn at school. The truth is, like, what's really important for us when we look at valuation is, do we see the path for Inovia on the growth fund to make a 3 to 5 times return on investment? And so for us, the entry valuation is important. The exit valuation exercise is like probably also super important because this is really where we can get a good sense of, are we going to make a return or not? So so the analysis is twofold in that sense. And again, it will depend on the stage. Like for a Series C is going to be quite different than for a kind of like pre-IPO round where multiples are a bit more relevant and more market. So to answer your question shortly, is that yes, we will use the typical valuation methodology, but the truth is this whole exit analysis and sensitivity around exit is really what's driving our decision at the end of the day.
Alex, you want to add something to this, and maybe even comment how it's different for early stage than late stage?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that valuation is, running the analysis is probably one data point. As Mia described, you're going to run your own internal analysis based on the company's data, and you're going to come up with a number. Now, another data point is what the market's willing to pay for it. And that often is not going to be supported by a calculation. It's going to be supported by another term sheet that the company might have from another investor. And then at that point, you have to determine whether the difference between what you've calculated based on fundamentals and what somebody else is willing to pay for it is worth it. And whether you're going to add a premium to the valuation you calculated. And so it often does come down to supply and demand economics in a marketplace. And one of the things that influences those, what you mentioned, is quality of entrepreneur. And if an entrepreneur has previously sold a business for tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, that is absolutely going to influence what somebody's going to be willing to pay for their next company. And so there are a number of qualitative factors that go into the way a market determines the valuation. Financial data is one of them, but it's not the only data point. And so you need to build your own kind of premium estimates on the others.
Perfect, thank you. I think Kanishk, next question, right?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, firstly, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. My question is, how do you manage relationships and reputations with entrepreneurs, in the sense that when you partner with companies, you want the best for them, but at the same time, they probably have a very strong view of where they think the company should be going. And sometimes those views don't line up. So what do you do in those instances? Because what you do impacts your reputation and impacts the probability that other founders will decide to partner with you in the future. And so you constantly want to be managing that reputation.
Yeah, on that point, I think Alex raised a very important element earlier in the conversation, that the relationship that we build with entrepreneurs are kind of long-term relationships, and we know there will be roller coasters, and that's why we select entrepreneurs, to make sure there's this. It's all about trust and about transparency, and how you build those relationships. So I think we know there will be some tougher period, and I think as long as you have this trust, confidence, and respect from the entrepreneur, and on both ways, by the way, I think those situations we are able to manage those situations quite in a constructive way. And like, I think COVID was a good example where we in some cases we had to take some tougher decisions, and I think our entrepreneurs knew that they had the support from Inovia, and they we were able to guide them, coach them, and really able to support them, and that was one of the kind of like down the road of the roller coaster, I think. But at the end of the day, I think they know we're there for the long term. We're not a short-term investor, and we're there for the long term and want what's best for the company.
I think I agree completely with me. I think one point to make that needs to be very clear is we do not operate these businesses. We're investors in the business. We can be advisors and support system to the founders and management teams, but they operate their business. It's their business. They know it better than we do. They make those decisions. Ideally, we align on strategic initiatives before we make an investment, and we challenge each other on the future of the business, the future of the world, and we ideally get all that out of the way and align on all that prior to an investment. That's not always the case, but if a founder has a different viewpoint than us, it comes down to the relationship and the chemistry we have with them to be able to trust them to do that, because at the end of the day, they're the operator.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Noah, you're next.
Yeah. Hey guys. First of all, thanks a lot for taking the time to do this today. So you guys kind of touched on how competitive it can be to source some of these deals. And what I was curious about is what differentiates your fund when competing against other VCs for a particular project? Thank you.
Sure. So I think versus other funds, I think the fact that our team, we have gone like, our team are operational investors versus just pure financial investors. And I think that's like a key point, at least in our partners. All our partners have either built businesses from scratch or kind of like really scaled businesses from to multi-billion-dollar companies. And I think to have credibility, that when you approach entrepreneurs and you tell them, we have done it on our side, we understand what you're going through, we know it's tough, but we know we have done it, and we can give you the support that you need to go to the next level. And I think that's something that makes Inovia very different versus other pure financial investors.
Yeah, I agree. We do leverage our operating experience, and we've built a whole value add services layer to Inovia as well to be able to help companies from a talent perspective, a sales and marketing perspective, a corp dev perspective. I think all that is a huge area of differentiation. However, a lot of other funds will have those things as well. And so, the competition, I think, in the end, comes down to relationships and chemistry. I think that the most competitive deals that we've won have been because we've gotten an emotional buy-in from those entrepreneurs to want to work with us as individuals. And that stems from our existing entrepreneurs vouching for us. So one of the first things we tell an entrepreneur in a competitive process is, go on our website, look at our portfolio, and call any CEO you want. If you want an introduction to another CEO in our portfolio, we'll make the introduction right away. And you can ask them how it's been to work with Inovia. You can ask them what kind of value we've delivered over the past few years. And that's the kind of way we build that trust and transparency with an entrepreneur over time that hopefully leads to their desire to choose us as a partner.
Awesome. Daniel?
Hey, just to build on the competitive aspect of the industry, you've mentioned that you've seen like a lot of capital come into Canada, and you've lost some deals to some non-traditional players. So just kind of wondering, is that new competition, do you see that changing the attractiveness of the industry in terms of return expectations? And just to build off of that, is there a clearer path into you leveraging your expertise to maybe spin out and start your own fund, as we've seen in the US?
On the return expectation, I mean, everyone says valuation are crazy right now, and we just hope valuation will stay crazy to make our exits. But it's super important to, when you had these discussions about valuation, to stay disciplined, and especially for growth deals, I'd say where the return expectations that are, it's more narrow, the range of returns that we're looking for. So staying disciplined is definitely super important, and we are patient. We have patient capital, and we are a long-term fund, so. We're making sure that we are taking our time to really pick the right opportunities. On raising a fund, I'm definitely not there yet. Like Alex said, I'm learning so much every day, and I feel I have still so much more to learn. I think right now I'm still like I'm in my kind of like sweet spots on where I want to be right now in my life, and who knows in 10 years. But right now, it's not on my radar.
Yeah, I think the competitiveness in the market is actually great. It's forced us to up our own bar and think of new creative ways to win deals. When I joined Inovia a few years ago, we were targeting a 100% win rate on deals, and every time we lost a deal, we would wonder what we could have done better, which is the right exercise. But I think we've actually realized that if you're winning 100% of your deals, you may not be looking at the right deals, because the absolute best deals are going to have lots of competition, and no matter what you do and how hard you work, you're probably going to lose some. So I think now we target, a 70 to 80% win rate, and that gives us confidence that we're in that upper band of deal flow. We're hopefully seeing the very best deals in our markets, and we accept the fact that those very best deals are going to be competitive, and we're going to do everything we can to win 7 or 8 out of 10 of them, and that's great.
Serge?
Yeah, hey guys, thanks again. My question is more like regarding outbound sourcing. So when you're outbound sourcing, I feel like it happens quite often that you're there trying to kind of convince the company to accept an investment. Can you kind of talk about that challenge and how you kind of pitch your Inovia as an incoming investor?
This is a case that I walk through in interviews with candidates. At the early stage, I usually spend about half of the first interview on this, where I basically ask the candidate to name a company that interests them. And then I say, okay, if you need to get a meeting with that CEO tomorrow, how do you do it? What do you write? Oftentimes a candidate will say, oh, a LinkedIn message. I say, okay, what do you write? Write the paragraph for me. You get in the room, how do you run the meeting? These are all really hard things to do. I think it took me probably at least 12 months in this role to learn how to interact with entrepreneurs like that and to have confidence to interact with entrepreneurs like that. I think going into VC, I was like proud of my background and my accomplishments. And then I started interacting with entrepreneurs and I realized like, they don't really give a shit about my background. They give a shit about like what questions I'm asking and how much I know about their business and what value I'm bringing to them. And it's completely irrelevant, whatever I've accomplished in the past. And all that's relevant is how much I planned and prepared for that interaction with them. So I think it's just about being super creative, being super prepared. So you should, if you're outbounding an entrepreneur, you better have some really interesting questions that get their mind turning and that are thought-provoking, that they probably have not heard from every single other person that reached out to them. Develop a thesis on their industry, even if it's the craziest or wildest thing, it'll at least get their mind turning because they spend all their time thinking about that problem. Probably try something more creative than a random LinkedIn post or a LinkedIn ping. So what I look for in those answers from candidates is like, do they have creativity? Can they exhaust all channels and all potential ways to get in touch with somebody? And can they kind of spur an interaction based on fundamentals and preparation and understanding versus just, hey, I'm a VC investor with capital. Do you want to meet next week? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that answers the question. Thanks.
Perfect. Maybe we can move to our last question. Leo?
Yeah, first of all, thanks to both of you for taking the time to be here today. It's really appreciated. So my question is kind of echoing the last question Jiro's asked about kind of forecasting the future and maybe more addressable to Alex. But when you're approached by founders for financing, let's say, how are you able to differentiate or kind of where do you draw the line between simply a good idea and a good idea that's going to transform into a successful business in the future?
Yeah, Mia, you probably have a better answer to this than I do. But I think what you're describing is a really tough skill to learn. It's not something that you're going to do on day one of the job. You need to start seeing a lot of pitches to be able to rank them in terms of quality. And what you often hear in the VC community is like, more senior investors have better pattern matching. And all pattern matching means is seeing more investments, seeing which ones turned out to be successes, seeing which ones turned out to be failures, and recognizing what the ingredients in each of those types of pitches and interactions were. So the more you see, the more that skill comes naturally to you. I honestly tell people all the time, and I tell new employees that started Inovia too, it's like, it took me a year to feel comfortable doing some of these things. It's not like one of these jobs that I came in and after a month I was like rolling and, calling entrepreneurs left, right, and center and diligencing pitches. Like these are skills that took time to develop. It takes seeing a lot of them to be able to do it.
I agree. And I think also a difference on venture versus growth on that point. When Alex looks at the deal, like he's probably seeing tons of like this similar type of concept of companies. And sometimes it's okay. It's okay to have competitors because that means that you have a real like demand pool for this type of offering. The balance, like the issue with growth is we actually, for us, what's really important is to back who's going to be the category leader in that company and how defensible is its moat versus all the others. So that's why your question on why is this company going to make it versus the others? That's like even like this is super important part, like a large part of the analysis I'm doing on really kind of like nailing down this mode. And like I said, it's a tough skill set to get, and it's about learning and seeing a lot of different types of opportunities, stages, industries, and it takes time to develop. But it's definitely pretty much top priority for me when I look at the growth opportunity.
It makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think, we have reached, the end of the questions. I think, again, echoing every student that's chimed in with a question, I want to, take the time to thank both Mia and Alex for just really an awesome opportunity to learn about, your careers and how you think about your careers and how you think about decisions that you make. I feel like I learned a lot today, so that's a win for me. Hopefully other students feel the same way. it's kind of one, I'll take a moment just to point this out. It's actually one of the most satisfying things for me as a professor is to be able to keep track of, just such talented people like Alex and Mia. Mia was not my student, but I remember that you were introduced to me by one of my ex-students, RA's, Rainus. And it's one of the things that I think is awesome to see. And I think one of the, what really differentiates Mia and Alex, maybe from the typical student, is actually something that they highlighted as super important in VC, which is this curiosity. And I think Benchmark would definitely call this like the mindset of a learn-it-all. So always approaching anything that you do with this desire to learn something from the experience beyond just the four corners of the task itself. And I just kind of feel like both Mia and Alex are outstanding at that. And that's one of the things that I at least personally try to emphasize in my teaching, right? So you might notice in any syllabus of a course I teach, I talk about this idea that I want to prepare you guys for unstructured, more opportunistic learning, which is actually a pretty difficult thing to test in a classroom, right? That's why my exams look pretty different from what I put in a homework or a case study. But hopefully you guys see with both Alex and Mia that, that skill gets rewarded because they're doing great in their careers. And I'm so proud of that. I'm not sure if that's weird that I'm proud of that, but I am. So like, I hope, some of you guys view that as added motivation beyond just today's talk on things that you guys want to be doing to invest in yourselves and because that puts you in a position to continue to learn post McGill, right? It's because Mia and Alex are so good at learning on their own like this that they can teach me so much, right? There's been a flip, right? I used to be the teacher, but now they're the teacher. And they're going to continue doing that for the rest of their lives, I'm sure. So like, I'm so excited to see where this goes as well. But yeah, I mean, as always, just the most sincere thank you for helping, younger generations of students and old geezers like myself to learn a little bit more. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Jiro. And anybody feel free to reach out anytime if you're looking for advice or anything. Happy to help McGill students anytime.
It was super fun. Nice meeting you all.
Thanks a lot. By the way, Mia, Alex, you guys can pop out at your own convenience. But one of the things I'd like to do in today's, like, if you guys have time, I would love to hear your perspective on what you thought about this event. If you have any ideas on how this could be done better, I would love to know, or what you particularly liked. At the end of the day, I view you guys as my main customer. And one of the things I've been learning a little bit this semester, honestly, in a more accentuated manner than in the past, is how important it is to be customer centric. You guys are going through unusual times. And, historically, I've kind of thought myself as product centric. I want to teach you guys as much as possible, but I'm realizing this semester that there's something more to it than that, which is that I need to kind of try to understand you guys a little bit, right? Especially now because there's so much I don't see. And I know, some folks are struggling. Some folks are kind of doing things in a different way. All of this is understandable. Sometimes it's perfectly rational, but it's making me realize that it's actually really important to understand things from your perspective. So any feedback that you guys give would be wonderfully appreciated. So I don't know if anyone wants to chime in with comments, but I would really appreciate it because I want to do this in a way that is valuable for you guys right now. But we have a recording here, and my hope is to be able to share it to other people in the future because that's a good thing. So
just before you start, I think I'm gonna hop off to make sure you have the continued discussion. But it was a super great event. Happy to stay in touch with whoever, and Jiro, I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
See you guys.
Merci beaucoup. Ciao. Yeah, so feel free to chime in with stuff. Go ahead.
I
Yes,
was
Leo. Oh, sorry. I didn't. The Zoom yellow box is kind of screwing with my mind. But yeah, anyone who wants to just chime in, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I was just going to add, just because I have to jump off soon, but the part I really liked was how they talked about how they got to their jobs and a bit about the interview process. Because in most of the fireside chats, they normally talk about the industry specifically. They don't really talk about what most students care about, which is how do you actually get the job. I think something that could have been a bit more helpful is if they talked about the process a bit more in the different stages and different rounds. In a VC interview, I think what there's a lot of transparency about is different rounds and stages for banking and consulting interviews. But with the like paradigm shifting, more students going towards VC, that would be very helpful information.
Got it. One thing I'll say is like, once you get to like the later rounds of VC interview, it starts becoming a little bit more wiggly where they just kind of adjust what they do based on what they see with you. So I think there's maybe less formulaicness than you might think, which makes that actually a little bit of a difficult question to answer. But nonetheless, send me an email with that question. It'll just make my life easier. I'll forward it to Mia and Alex, and I'm sure they'll give you guys some perspective on that. Any other comments? Maybe I'll ask one thing. Do you guys find this as being additive to whatever you guys get normally at McGill? Maybe yes, no it. And don't worry, I'm not offended if you put a no. By yes, no it, I mean there's a button called yes and a button called no. So I'm just kind of looking at this to try to get a sense. All right. I mean, that's good to see that there's no red. Okay, good. That's nice to hear. Maybe I'll ask another question, which is, okay, if you hadn't been here, do you think a recording of this would be useful to you as well? So maybe everyone on yes, no, so that now we can refresh and I can get a sense of, because this is important to me. I want this to be structured in a way where it's not a one-shot benefit, that it's, what we call, people who know me know that I'm obsessed with recurring revenue models. I want this to be a recurring benefit because what it does is it actually respects the time of Mia and Alex by trying to generate the most possible value from their donation to us, so to speak, right? And so I'd be curious about that. And if anyone has some views on how this content could be repackaged to maximize that did not attend live, but willing to consume the content afterwards, that would maximize that benefit. It could be a podcast. Who knows? Like, I'm open to ideas. I maybe put too many questions in one bucket there, but maybe yes, no on whether you think this would be useful content for me to share after the fact for those who don't attend live. And maybe like one way to think about it is, had you not attended, would you want to consume this content, and would you have been happy to use up your free time to do it?
Can I jump in and say something?
Sure.
About that? I consider that it's definitely it's really, at least for me, it's really valuable if it's only a recording or if it's a live session. But what I would like to say is that for one of our classes, actually for capital markets, the professor is trying to put short videos with the specifics of that video, and that kind of makes you more willing to see the content. So I don't know, but what I will consider a good idea will be to divide the video on your questions and then the questions of the students. Maybe that could be some way in order to kind of make it easier to see the videos. Because if you are watching a recording of 2 hours or something like that, I don't say that this one, but in general, maybe you would like to I don't know, put past really fast pace, So that's it's just an opinion, but I consider that like the more like structure is, it's probably the easier to watch the content.
Yeah, so definitely useful feedback. I mean, I guess in principle, I could make it available in two ways: the full session and broken down. Well, I mean, I think people know that I break up the things for all of my videos that I share for teaching purposes anyway, because I totally agree. It's like, you know, if it's just one video, just, you guys are too young to know about this, but there used to be these things called cassette tapes that, you know, you had to, like, if you only liked one song in the band's album, this was a very frustrating experience to try to fast forward and get right to that song. So I totally agree with you on that.
Jiro, could I hop on real quick to say something?
Sure.
I think for the idea that you were saying about a podcast, I think I see like the idea. The only thing with a podcast is that you're kind of limited to the questions that the host is asking, whereas here, like, a lot of people were throwing ideas or questions, so it maybe generate a bit more ideas. So if we could mitigate like this into the concept of the podcast, it could work. And I think something that I personally really enjoyed is that it was a good split between you handling it as like a moderator at the beginning and then letting open the questions to a lot of people at the end, because what usually happens in these sorts of like talks or chats is that the moderator doesn't take enough lead, and so you end up with a lot of like awkward silence, whereas here it was good because you were getting question after question, getting info from them, and then you let us take the lead on the questions. So I think the split was pretty good.
Cool, thanks. Accidental. I won't take credit for that. But okay, so I mean, I think the split was about 2/3, 1/3. So maybe going for something in that neighborhood is good. And that, you know, being on Zoom makes it a little bit easier because you got the clock right in front of you. And also, you know, I was able to more efficiently in the chat box just say, you know, this person asked the next question, this person asked the next question, so that it does eliminate some of that silence. So, right, because that's also something that I want to think about, by the way, right? You know, look, as I said before, you guys have been tossed a lemon with the current environment, but I'm trying to think about what can we learn from this experience together to partially take some of the lemons and make some lemonade, right? And what I mean by that is, can I find ways to use stuff like Zoom to offer educational value to you that is almost better to offer in this way than in what we would usually do. So you know, anything that you guys, if you guys come up with any brilliant idea on that front, please tell me, or start a company that exploits that, and I'll invest in you. Yeah. Any other feedback?
I guess kind of to chime in kind of on what they said, I think having like a more structured, like a podcast type of thing, like in having like a timeline with a moderator before, like start by talking about this, then transition toward this, would be more helpful for like non-live students, where I feel like this was more of an open format, but like being here live, I preferred the open format much more. It's like random questions coming in. And
to be clear, when I say podcast, I basically mean a somewhat edited audio file, right? So like, you know, my view is I would take, you know, the best parts of this stuff and, you know, kind of isolate those audio files. I might add a little bit of commentary myself after the fact to give a bit of a broader context on some answers. But I would still actually want to keep the student questions. You guys asked very good questions. And I love, right? I mean, I think this is important, right? Because, you know, you guys maybe don't feel like you have enough of that right now. And so, like, to me, that's a core component of anything I would want to package later. I mean, at least initially. I mean, I don't know, like, if people say, like, you know, it's too long, we're not interested in the questions of our peers. I mean, I don't think people would say that, but you never know. I don't pretend to know the customer. But but yeah, so when I say podcast, I don't mean like exactly the same way that a podcast gets done,
Mhm.
you know, in practice. I honestly just meant it as an audio file that people could just consume on the go, you know, while they're driving, so that there's, you know, I don't want people driving and watching a YouTube video. That would not be good. Something like that, you know. That's so I mean it kind of a little bit more. Maybe I wasn't very precise, but I am also not very precise because I don't really know the right way to do it. So yeah, I mean, maybe I might just try to hack a little something with this event, just like a template, you know, podcast. Who knows when I'll do it, because time is scarce for myself as well as for you. But when I have the time, I might just do something dinky. And if it's okay with you guys, I'll just email it to you, and you guys can let me know if time permits, you know, whether you think this hits some good notes, and you can also tell me what the sour notes are. But I would very much appreciate that. But hopefully you guys feel like this was worth your time. Because that's at the end of the day what's most important. And hopefully you feel like today's talk, like today's session, reinforces some of the things that I try to reiterate over and over again in my own teaching, which is that, you know, a lot of the soft stuff that they mention is so enormously important for your careers. And unfortunately, I feel that that's something that gets underemphasized in the classroom. It is tough. It is tough to like do that. I don't know. I still haven't figured out myself, and I've been trying for years. But you know, if this can even be helpful on that dimension to give you guys buy-in on, for, you know, because, you know, one thing that I get every year is like students say like, look, there's a disconnect between the homework and your lectures and the final exam. And there's frustration around that, right? But there's a reason why I do it. It's because I can't test that stuff on an exam. It would be just unfair to anyone taking the exam. But that doesn't mean I should drop this stuff, because you look at Mia and you look at Alex, and there's many, many more examples. That matters more probably, right? So if we're not teaching this in the classroom, if we're not giving you a low stakes environment to get comfortable with that, I don't think we're doing our job as an educational. That's my, look, I have a certain teaching philosophy, right? Not everyone agrees with me, but that's my view. Like, that's something that I'm pretty firm on, because I know I've seen it even with my friends, you know, every case where someone was shitty in the classroom and did amazing in life, it's because they were really good at that. Every single, like 100% hit rate. So, you know, to me, that's data that tells me something, right? So yeah, I'm still open to more feedback. So if anyone wants to chime in with anything else, Morgan, I think we had said that we would also have a little chit chat after this as well. So hopefully that's still okay with you. But look, I also want to thank you guys. You guys asked great questions. So I think you guys will have left a good impression collectively with you know, Inovia. And I'm going to share whatever video that eventually, not video, but whatever content eventually gets done. I'm going to share it with Chris Arsenault, who's the main founder of Inovia, probably the most prominent venture capitalist in Canada right now. I'll share it with him as well. I'm not sure if he's going to have the time to look at it. So, like, you know, I'm not promising anything there. But he's always been a good guy for my VC course, at least. And he's always supported other people from Inovia, you know, doing things like we just did today. But you guys did a great job representing the university, you know, and that's important, because I'm trying, one thing that I try to do is I'm trying to build relationships. So right there, right, as they said, like, right, the last 5 jobs were all not externally posted. So I want to make sure I'm like one of the early emails that they send out, so that I know the internal stuff, right? And it helps to have students making good impressions like this, right? Like, you know, they're reaching out to me not because of what they think about me. It's actually what they think about you. So if they're reaching out to me, it says something good about you collectively, right? And without that, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a waste of their time. So you guys, I think, helped with that. So thank you.
One suggestion just in terms of how the actual day is structured. So I was in one of these chats where it was on Zoom as well, but they were able to have questions, and then the participants were able to vote on which questions they wanted answered. So if I know that for this time we didn't have like a plethora of questions, but next time if we do, then we can have like the most sort of what the participants feel are the most pertinent questions answered.
That's interesting. I'd have to learn. Let's put it this way. I'm like level 2 in Zoom. That seems like a level 6. So if someone is good at playing the Zoom video game and wants to help me with that, for sure. I'm probably not going to play the game to get to level 6 because I just don't have the time. But certainly like anything that helps us. Like I was randomly picking who goes next, right? So like you certainly like. We were lucky today because everyone who wanted to ask a question got to ask it, and it still worked well. We literally finished exactly on time. That's a miracle as far as I'm concerned. So like, if anyone has an idea and wants to volunteer to help me implement a better question prioritization algorithm, if we want to use bombastic statements, I'm totally down with that. So I guess maybe it sounds like we might be good. Again, don't hesitate. You can email me in the future if you have any brilliant ideas. I think collectively you guys probably do. So, but also criticism. Look, I'm totally, some of the best things you learn is from people telling you something that they didn't find engaging. So I'm also 100% open to that. Hopefully folks know that I'm not going to be defensive about that. Because look, at the end of the day, you know you better than I know you. So, and it's kind of like your preference that matters, because if I design something for myself, it's going to be kind of weird. And it's going to be for like an audience of one. That's not really good for scalability. So yeah, any feedback would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of the week, everybody.